We are live. Yes. So, hi everyone. So, hi everyone. My name is Larissa Bergamini, and currently I am president of UFPel IFG Student Chapter here in Brazil. I hope you are healthy and safe. So, due to the interest of people from other countries in this lecture, we decided to talk something quickly about what is FG and about the UGS FG Student Chapter. Well, to do that, we have here Marcelo Tortolero. He is EFG student representative, and we'll talk about these issues. Marcelo?
Hi, Larissa. Thank you so much for introducing me. Hi, guys. Hey, all. My name is Marcelo Tortolero, and I am the IFG student representative right now. And the initiative on forensic geology is an initiative that started 10 years ago in Europe with a group of geologists who worked in the law enforcement organizations. Aiming to promote and develop geoforensics globally. So in the last year, we started the IFG student chapters associated to the initiative on forensic geology with their support, and things are going great. We have 11 IFG student chapters established here in Brazil, one IFG student chapter in Argentina, and another in Chile. So now I think that Larissa will introduce Benjamin Rocke, and good lecture for you all. Thank you guys so much. See you soon.
All right. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes. No, yes. I can see.
Okay. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about geoforensic sampling schemes using remote sensing and geostatistics. So a lot of this is primarily drone data that I'll show you. In terms of remote sensing, I mean data taken by drones. So just to frame this, if you were a forensic geologist and you showed up at, say, either one of these scenes here, and there was a crime scene in one of these red boxes, what would you do? And when I began this work, and by the way, this is my first year. This is very preliminary content, so I'm completely open to feedback. If anyone has questions, feel free to interrupt, or suggestions. Completely open. But if you showed up at either one of these scenarios, would you know what to do? So how would you capture the geology? Or as a geologist, how would you show up and characterize this scene and then know how to sample it? So if you wanted to take soil samples to represent these two schemes, what would you do? So what people generally do now is they do a site walkover. So you can see here, there's police officers and they've set up these lanes here. So they can walk these lanes and do like a finger search. Part of the problem with this is one, cadaver decomposition remains. They aren't very well understood in terms of their shape. So it's not always easy to identify where a cadaver is buried. So sometimes if a cadaver is buried here, some organic material may travel, it may create a plume, and you may get an increase in vegetation, say downslope, but the body is located upslope. So as forensic geology has progressed and as remote sensing has progressed, one thing that's happened is this shift from satellite imagery to drone imagery. So this is some drone footage that I've taken here. This is a 40-acre or 16-hectare site that's near where I live, and it's overlain over Google Earth. So this is the latest Google Earth from 2019, I believe, or 2020. And the resolution on satellite data, I just want to show you. So for every pixel, it's about 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters. So that's how much ground it's taking for one pixel. But a drone, you can see this little pink dot, a drone, the maximum resolution that I can get on this map here is 1/2 centimeter per pixel. So just to give you an idea, I think that's about 400 times the resolution of satellite imagery. So the implications for that are still unfolding, and people are now attaching increasingly higher tech to drones. And so I think there's probably more data and more implications than people know what to do with. So the evolution for how a sampling strategy started, here would be Raymond Murray. So he was the pioneer of forensic geology. And to give you an idea of his work, he would take samples of a crime scene and compare them to comparison samples. So there would be a scene of a crime. He would take samples here. Police would find like a suspect vehicle, and he would compare the two. Or what would typically happen, and I think his strategy in terms of testifying in court is
Ben, excuse me. Can you please put your screen in full screen, please?
Yeah.
Now it's better. Thank you so much.
Better? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry. Right. So what he would do is take a sample from here and go to a suspected site and compare it visually to the soil that he saw. So as things have progressed over the last 50 years, they've become more quantitative. And just to give you some idea, the aerial photography that he would have had at the time, and this is 20 years later in 1993, it's all I could find for this area. The resolution for aerial photography would have been so poor that they would have had to fly it with a plane. So that was not like remote sensing was not a particularly practical solution for that. So in 2007, this was updated here by Pi. So you can see here there's a variety of geometric designs here to capture different scenes. So you can see here some are point centered, some are line centered, some are grid centered, and down here you can see that his sampling strategies, they do change according to geology. But still, this doesn't leave the investigator with a very clear sense of which scenario he or she should choose. So fast forward to 2013, Donnelly and Harrison, they create this RAG map, red, amber, green, so the stoplight colors in the UK. And so they would create this map here of using topography, using geology, and they would say what land is diggable and what land is not. So they would use these red areas here to indicate where something could potentially be buried. The problem with this here, and I've indicated here, is that this is on the scale of miles or kilometers. So it's not particularly detailed. I mean, he can get more detailed than that, but some geologic maps don't get particularly specific. So in addition to that, the desk study here can take time. It's pulling together multiple sources of information, and I still don't know that that leads to a very comprehensive view of a crime scene. So if we enter drone data, so this is the test site that I showed you, the 40-acre, 16-hectare site. The property owner here is named Blancet, and they've given me permission to do some testing here. So this is data that I took with consumer grade drone. It took me maybe half an hour to fly. I upload it and it comes back in a few hours processed, and the detail on it is incredible. So if I zoom in, you can see all sorts of things that we can't see in Google Maps, but we can do more. This is an ortho photograph, but we can create a digital terrain model here. So basically, it can take the ortho photo and it can derive elevation from it. It can even strip away the vegetation to show you exactly what the topography is doing. So if I go back here to this ortho photo, it's difficult to see some of the topography through the forest here. But if I move forward here to the digital terrain model, you can see very clearly what's happening. So in terms of like diggability and things like that, this would be something really important that you would need to know. These dots here will come in later. I took soil samples at each one of these spots. So these are 80 meters apart, and there are 100 samples here. So I'll touch on that a bit later. One other thing that I'm getting into, and that you'll see in a paper that we put out, is using vegetative indices. So a vegetative index here is something that it's trying to see how much chlorophyll content is in the plant growth. So what it's doing is it's taking, you can see the formula here. I'm not particularly inclined mathematically, but what it's doing is it's asking essentially how much green is bouncing back, because the greener it is, the more chlorophyll it has, the healthier the plant life. And with that, we can see maybe anomalies, like if the ground is disturbed, you might, or there might be a red area and a sea of green, say. And you'll notice here the river is bouncing back a lot of green light, green and blue light, which makes sense. And this was taken very early spring, so before the trees really leafed out. And just to give you some idea, there are probably 20 different vegetative indices, maybe probably more. And I'll be working more with that and show you a little bit more about that. So if we derive like a rag map, and I've actually reversed these colors, these colors here. So this would actually be highly diggable here, the green, and then the red would be very low diggability, and this would be medium diggability here, and this is just based off of slope. But I can do further analysis and say with those 100 samples that I took, is I can then do the grain size proportion and plot it up. And in this case, I actually had a friend of mine sort of commit a crime. I asked him to take this entire site and pretend like he had some evidence to bury. And I didn't tell him where to go. I didn't give him any clues. I just said, if you were going to bury something, where would you go? And you can see here, here's the stream bed. And what he did is he went out here, saw that there was a point of low elevation, and went to that stream bed. He did this in clean boots, then walked back up, and I took his boots from him and then processed those as a comparison sample. Then he told me where he went, and I flew my drone over it, and you can see the footprints that he left because he's right on the edge of the stream here. So these pie charts here, they're showing clay and then fine, medium, and coarse sand. I can break that out into more detail. I wanted to give you just a general idea here. So because he's at this stream bed here, there's a lot of sand content. So the clay is washing away, or the river is washing away the clay and the fines, and it's leaving the coarser sand behind. I take all of these samples, then I take 100 samples from here, and I can put them in a dendrogram. So this is using it's called a Ward method. It's using Euclidean distances, basically saying how alike are all of these different samples. And I'll show you on the next slide how it plots this graphically, but it's taking 100 samples and it's putting it into 10 different groups. So it's like a tree that has 10 branches coming out, and it sort of arranges like with like. So here it's looking at the increase in sand content at the at the crime scene, which is here, and then I took his boots, which are samples 101, 2, 3, and 4, and you can see that it's put them in the same tree. So that really helps us understand, like if you were to sample something like this and find a suspect and his boots are muddy, you can pinpoint where he's been. If he says, yes, I was on the property, but oh, I was up here, you can say, no, you weren't. There's so much sand content in your boots that you had to have been down here. Just to show you what this looks like in a cluster plot. So it's taking 10 different clusters here, and it's grouping all of these samples accordingly. So you can see here the shoes are all grouped into one, and then the boots here are nearby. These samples here, my guess is they are far upslope. They would have more gravel or more clay. They would be the most significantly different. So this is some statistics that I'm working on. This is ongoing. There are more projects to do, but I wanted to show you kind of what this looks like. Another thing I'm doing is using color to try to differentiate samples. So what I showed you before was grain size fraction. So breaking out the soil, the sand, the silt, the gravel. One thing I'm trying to look at is color. It's more difficult to plot, and it's more difficult to get to make those dendrograms out of, but I have one of these color sensors here. So I have this, it's called a Nix2 color sensor, and these are Petri dishes here. I put the sample in there, and I hold the sensor to the bottom, so it shines through the glass and looks at the color of the sample. So you can see here. So this is the exact color in RGB that these samples are, and these are the composite samples. So it's everything that came out before they were sieved. And you can see that the color is different. These are all overexposed. So I've basically added more light to show all of the texture here. I could change that and make it true color, but it darkens it and it doesn't show all of the content as well. So then I can move on to, oops. So this is 250 micrometers. So this is more like a medium sand here. You can see that a lot of sand is coming out of the river sample here, and a lot of sand is coming out of the boots. And then we have corresponding colors here, which are very similar. And then same thing here with a finer sand. So this is just showing a fine sand and a coarse sand, and you're getting a lot of sand out of these boot samples here, and a lot out of the riverbed. So future work, what's next? So as I said, I've flown this with a drone, this site with a drone, and I'm working up kind of in the technological advances with what I can do. And so I recently acquired this Centera 6X multispectral sensor. So what it's doing is, like, this is the visible wavelength of light here. So you go above this and you are in near infrared or infrared, and you go below this and you're in ultraviolet. So it's capturing blue, green, red edge, it's called, right here. So just beyond what you can see visibly, and then near infrared, which is completely invisible to the naked eye. So this is the drone, and this is the sensor here, and I'll show you here. This is me taking off. Let's see here if I don't know if the audio is on for that. So I just flew this in my backyard. So this is it taking off. Oops, I'm sorry. And then this here is landing. I hope there was sound for this, but there's not. The sound can give you some idea of how big this is. You can see that on top is a sun sensor. So what it's doing is it's looking at the intensity of the sun. You can see here it's landed. The legs actually fold down to land, and then they fold up when it flies, so the legs don't get in the way of the camera. But there's a sun sensor on top that calibrates all of the readings according to how intense the sunlight is. And this here is a composite of all of these different multispectral bands. So there are 5 of them, plus there's an RGB camera. So these are all 5 stacked. And if you recall, in the previous slides, I used vary for one of the vegetative indices. This gives me access here, as you can see, to probably 8 or 10. So these are all the different indices that I can use. So something sort of fortuitous happened at this 40-acre site. We found a dead deer. So a deer must have been sick or something, and it died. So we decided to use it as an experiment. So I took some aerial photographs with the drone, just flew it over at a low altitude. So here's the deer here. We dug a pit. There's the pit, there's the pile next to it, and then there's the buried deer. And it's about here. I'll show you an aerial photo. So there's this orange bucket to delineate where the site is, and then the deer is buried there. So what happens, though, is here's a digital terrain model of the deer. This isn't particularly helpful. There's no real anomaly there. But if you had a body that had a significant mound to it, you might be able to detect it with a terrain model. This did not. just because the forest floor already has so many anomalies on it. But what happens if you look in this photo here to the right, this is an ortho photo taken later, and you can see it's really difficult to see that deer site. And if you were looking at all 40 acres at once, it would be difficult to see it. So that's why we need the vegetative indices, is they show different things to what the orthomosaics show. So they give you something that's beyond what's visible to the naked eye. So you can see here, this is B and DVI. It's basically showing how much blue is reflecting back. And you can see here, not very much blue is reflecting back on the trees that are down here. More blue is reflecting back from the forest floor because it's starting to get green. And then the side of the deer here is reflecting less. And you can see that the pattern is different. Like all of these trees have kind of a linear pattern to them. And then there's this kind of mottled sort of blob here that might indicate that there's been a ground disturbance. So it's reflecting back less blue light. And then the next slide here shows, here's a green. Green looks very similar. So it's bouncing back less green light relative to everything around it, less blue light to everything around it. And then here's the orthomosaic again, where you'd have a lot of difficulty seeing something. So these are just two that I've used here. This is an example of some that are commonly used. What are there? 2, 4, 6, 7. There's many more, but it puts it in this false color scheme here. So this is less absorption, so less green absorption, say, gives you red, and then more green absorption gives you more green. So this is something that I am looking into more, and this is something that I'll be flying this summer, more flight, maybe some green burial grounds to see if I can delineate where real human burials are, where they might not be visible to the naked eye, to try to understand like those cadaver islands, maybe as it's buried, you know, and some decompositional matter might go down slope. And so you might actually see vegetation increase because of the nutrient load. So it's possible that next spring, when I go and film this site, that the ground cover has grown back and it's actually healthier than that around it because of the nutrients from the decaying deer. So next year we may be able to come back and then there will be an anomaly here that's positive, not negative. So the point of this is that once you bury something, the vegetation, you put it out of step with that around it. And initially you destroy the vegetation, but you've dug something up, so you've oxygenated the soil. You've put something in there, organic matter that's going to decay. And so eventually it's going to recover and it's going to basically fertilize the plants that are over it. So here's a case study that we did. This is a poster. Here we go. It's, oops. Sorry, it's huge. The file size is huge. And I think I can zoom in here. Sorry, give it 1 second. It's very, very big. So this is in Northern Ireland, where my advisor is. And in 2004, he was presented with a cold case. So in 1984, a woman, a teenager, gave birth out of wedlock to a multiracial child, which at the time carried a huge stigma, and the mother very sadly drowned the infant and buried it in the back garden. The daughter said nothing until 2004 when her mother died, because she didn't want her mother to face charges. So she came before the English police in 2004, told them what had happened, and my advisor, Alastair Ruffell, was contacted. So what Alastair did is he created an analog site first. So before he went to the real site, which is here, he created an analog site. So he went in his back garden and he just took a bag, like a woolen bag that had organic matter in it that was about the size of an infant, and he dug a shallow grave, put it in there, and then did a GPR scan just to see what it would look like, so he knew what to look like at the actual site. So this was back in 2004, and that is still in his back garden 17 years later. So what he did is he flew it with a drone. Let me see if I can zoom in here more. Sorry, guys. So this is his back garden here. I wish I could zoom in more. This is his back garden here, and this is the 2008 satellite imagery at the time. This is the drone imagery that he flew in 2020, and what he did is he looked at his back garden from the point of view of a crime scene. So he looked at site visibility, so where someone would bury something would be naturally out of sight, and would dig in the most diggable area. So he looks at his entire back garden. He looks at the topography. He can narrow it down and say, hey, these higher points, they're visible and they would be less diggable. So let's narrow it down to the areas that aren't as visible and are more diggable. So he narrows it down here to this corner. And you can see here, here's the elevation map. This is the vegetative index here. And I don't think the arrow is pointing to the right thing, but I'll show you, and I'll show you further here where the anomaly is. You can do cool things with the graphics in this. You can take this orthomosaic and turn it into a 3D model. You can rotate it so you can see this plot of land from all different perspectives. I do want to point out this because it is significant. So if you were walking this site here, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't see an anomaly. You're limited by sight in what you can see and what you can observe that is visible from the air. So this is what it looks like. This is the site just visible to the naked eye as he would walk over it. And then here are the vegetative analyses. So for the vegetative indices. And I'm sorry I can't zoom in more, but you can see there is a tiny little disturbance here. It's visible here. It was actually visible in NDVI, like right here. So 17 years later, he can still see this anomaly that he dug in the ground, and you can even see it in the orthomosaic here slightly. So it is impressive that 17 years later, we can still see the vegetative anomaly. So what he did, he saw the anomaly. He didn't actually remember exactly where he buried it. So he took GPR out and scanned it in 3D here and took a few time slices and was actually able to locate it. So here's the burial that's 17 years old, and it matches up with the anomalies in the vegetative analysis and actually visible in the ortho photographs. So we don't have a lot of sites that are 17 years old. That's great. We can go back and we can look at victims from the Irish potato famine, which are 125 years old, something like that. So that's really old. But we don't have a lot of options in terms of newer graves or slightly older graves. So what I did is create, and due to COVID, because I couldn't travel really, is I created my own simulated graves. So here I created an adult grave, so it's about 2 meters long, and it's paper bags filled with grass and leaves and twigs. And then I did the same here for a child burial, so just something smaller made of the same. So in the ortho photo here, this is the simulated adult grave, the simulated child grave, and these here are flown about a month apart. So this is in October, this is in November, October, and November. So you can see how small the child grave is, and as a month elapses, the anomaly here is becoming more difficult to see. So just to throw this in here, I try looking at the elevation map that it generates to see if I can see a clear anomaly. I can't. So that hasn't been super helpful. It is something that I can look at more in terms of getting increased resolution or something like that, but right now we've not found that terribly helpful. What we have found really helpful is the vegetative indices. So here's the adult grave here. This is actually more difficult to see. This is in my backyard. And in an urban setting where the ground is disturbed more, it's more difficult to see an anomaly. Like you can see here, in November, things have pretty much died. And there's no real anomaly there. You can barely maybe pick out something here, but it's really inconclusive. This is more of a perfect burial site. This is out in a rural setting near a cornfield. All of this red here is a cornfield that's been harvested, and this is a grass strip. And you can see here the disturbance when it was dug, and then you can see it a month later here. So this is indicating that the vegetation is actually it's been damaged. And if I go out and I fly it this spring, which I need to do, it could be that the vegetation is enhanced. I don't know. So future work here, we'll be flying real burial sites, so natural or green burials. There's a movement in the UK and here in the US to do green or natural burials. So there's no embalming fluid. The body is not embalmed. It's not buried in a solid wood casket. Here in the U.S., we usually put the casket inside of like a cast iron box to completely seal it. These are just bodies that are wrapped in linen or wool, or maybe given a wicker basket, and they're just buried in the ground about a meter deep. And those would mimic homicide sites. They would be great analogs for finding things like the Irish potato famine victims. So that's something that I'll be doing this summer, and I hope to fly about 7 of them. These real burial sites too, I'll be taking soil samples from them as well. So as you go across a grave, since you've turned up the bottom of the grave there, you've disturbed the soil horizons. So what's on the bottom of the grave is now on the top. And if you were to do a cross section across it, you should be able to see something different in the grain size fractions. Variograms, getting into more geostatistics, so you can see here comparing soil samples on the ground more with these plots here that are showing similarities and likenesses here, and that can give me trends with respect to slope or topography or some sort of anomaly that I would see in a vegetative index. And the output of that then would hopefully be a recommendation on how to sample an area. So going back to that first slide, I don't know if I can. Going back to the second slide here is I can look at all of my data, I can compile it, and I can say the best scenario here for sampling, it might be to do a cross or maybe a circle or maybe a simple grid, and it might change here based off of the topography or the vegetation. So ultimately my goal is that you, as the forensic geologist showing up to this site, could look at something that I've done, look at my work, and have some idea of how to sample a site. So that's all I had. That's about 45 minutes, and I wanted to leave time for questions. And if you guys want to see anything else, let me know. But yeah, we have plenty of time for questions.
Hey Ben.
The
Thank
lecture
you.
was great, Benjamin. Thanks so much. Now let's see if we have some questions.
Oh, I have one.
Yeah.
Ben, I'd like to know how would you approach different environments like icy environments or deserts or something like without any vegetation. How would you approach this kind of environments?
Right. So the interesting thing about the multispectral data is in the absence of vegetation, it can tell me something about the composition of the soil. So because it's looking at specific bands, it will reflect more different minerals that are in the soil. So I don't see desert sites as necessarily something that's problematic. I see them as something that would be more illustrative of the soil itself. I don't understand. I see. So if you were to have a burial in the desert, my hope would be is that as you fly it with the multispectral sensor, that you would see a change where that grave is. So that is something that I plan to do. It's something that I want to do. The most difficult obstacle for me in terms of flying is through forest. I can't see through leaves. So that the site that I showed you there, the 40-acre site, I have to fly it either in the spring or in the autumn when the leaves are down.
So the north of Brazil would be a challenging place to apply this technique, maybe.
Yeah. Yes. As of now, almost impossible. And the people that I've spoken with, their only thought is to get a drone that's small enough and technical enough that it would be able to fly through the forest So it would be able to navigate through the trees in film, so it would fly at very low elevation, and through obstacle detection, be able to fly some sort of path through rainforest. But yeah, I don't see a way to see through like a tropical rainforest canopy.
Do we have any questions, Lani?
Questions? Not yet, but some congratulations for the presentation. And Fabio comments about the forensic geology in Brazil.
Okay. If anyone wants to contact me, I'm just gonna do this. I think my screen is still showing.
Lucas, can you show up the screen, please? Yes.
So this is my email. If anyone has any questions or any input, like I said, this is my first year. So if you guys have ideas, if there's a scenario that you want me to look at, feel free to email me. This is my email address. I'm trying to find more applications, as much diversity in this technology as possible. I've invested in the drone and in the sensor, and I want to use it as fully as possible and in as many environments as possible. So yeah, do please reach out.
Ben, and about your simulations, did you try searching for something like drugs or weapons or this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so there is a site in Northern Ireland where the IRA buried a stash of guns, and when I showed you like the initial sites, like when I showed you the child burial, I can go back to the deer site here. So what this is showing is the initial disturbance here. It's not really showing effects of decomposition because it hasn't really started yet. So anytime the soil has been disturbed, regardless of what's been put in there, organic or not, it does have some effect on the soil. So that's something that we're going to look at this summer. There is a stash of, where guns were buried. They've since been excavated, but we are looking at whether we can detect just ground disturbances.
Okay.
Go back up here. So yeah, any other questions?
I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, feel free. What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and if when it's safe to come to Brazil, I can bring my drone, and if there are flights or if there are sites that you guys are curious in me flying,
Sounds amazing.
I'm open to that. Yeah, we can collaborate on that. I can come down. We can fly whatever you like. So
let's keep talking about it, please.
Yeah. There's a question here. Do you know anyone that tried geophysics on drones?
We have one question here is on the screen.
So there's also a question about a magnetometer device. So there are people who are who are doing that. I have heard of people flying magnetometers or gravitometers, gravity sensors to form, you know, when we look at gravity or mag maps, it's usually on a large scale, so we can see blocks that are uplifted, or some like lineations within the bedrock. But if you fly it on a drone, you can see basically a micro scale. And people have done this in oil and gas, actually. They've flown, I don't know if they do it on a drone, or I believe it was on a helicopter at the time, but they would take like a micromagnetic survey of areas to try to detect oil wells that weren't documented. So when people go in and they drill and they frack, they're not fracking into that existing well that they don't know about. So there are like really small scale magnetic surveys. In terms of putting one on a drone, I'm sure you could. You can put LiDAR on a drone, you can put thermal on a drone. It's really just limited by, for me, cost. There are hyperspectral sensors, which is a whole other, it's just a whole other game. And when I talk about my multispectral sensor that's looking at 5 different bands, a hyperspectral sensor can look at hundreds of different bands, and it's so much information. So for every pixel on the ground, you would see, you know, data from 100 bands stacked on top of each other. And I think it's right now more data than people really know what to do with. So let's see here. Many cases of forensic geology. Forensic GeoStat is a company that I started just in case I got any consulting work along the way for my PhD. I haven't gotten any cases yet. I'm not actively looking for cases. It's just there if I need it. If something comes up that would make a great case study, I have the company to do it. So right now it's just serving as a placeholder for consulting in the future. Right now, geology or the PhD keeps me busy. So yeah, forensic geostat is on the back burner for now.
But do you intend to keep the company and develop it for the future when you finish your PhD and stuff? You
Yeah,
want to keep acting like a geoforensic, like a forensic geologist in the US?
yeah. I'll keep the company for as long as I can, unless something changes. Um, you know, even people who take the route of academia will sometimes do consulting, and they need like their own company basically to handle the expenses and the payments and such. So that will stay active regardless of what I do. Any other questions? Let me see here.
I think it's the last. We don't have more.
Yeah, Fabio, if
Okay.
you want to reach out, we can get a conversation going about maybe flying some sites in Brazil when it's safe.
Yeah.
So I think I could probably get to Brazil, but they wouldn't let me back in into the US.
Okay. Would be an amazing experience, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yep. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to email me. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ben.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Ben. Good night. I think we can finish.
He left us.
Lucas, pode. I think we can finish this.